Let's go next. Yep. Shots. Oh, that's nice. Okay. Alright. Alright. Okay. Let's push this one too. No. Well. Okay.
Handy done.
Not that good. Yes. Oh, we are on the other side. Okay. Of course. What can I choose to? Wow. Okay. Okay. Now let's see what we can do today. Oh. Right. Welcome back. Projects here. We are in Wednesday. Contention server. It's like we are in a new map. It seems the tides are turned. Yesterday we were operating north on the red side or blue side. I know it was. Now it's different. We were busy over here, and it was over there. I can continue over there, but seems to be some stuff that needs to be defended. Okay. What are we going to do? Yeah, over here. It's really a long flight. We can operate. Let's make FARP 13 something special. Right. I can also go for factory strike. It would be fun. Factory. Strike. Factory. Okay. And then we have like a friendly base over here. Central. Yep, we get sound. Let's get voice control. Let's continue with Art of War.
Wei was for waiting until this had abated before deciding on a final
Usually
attack.
go on.
But luckily another officer, Li Shu Cheng by name,
Let's get started.
and said, "They are many and we are
Gee,
few,
focus up.
but in the midst of this sandstorm. Our
Chief,
many
net
and we are
ground air
few,
supply.
but in the midst of this sandstorm, our numbers
Chief,
will
incoming
not
ground
be
power.
discernible. Gogu the strenuous fighter, and the wind
Ground
will
air
be our
supply is
best
now
ally."
connected.
Accordingly, Fu Yen, Qing made a sudden
Copy.
and wholly unexpected
Ground
onslaught
power
with his
is now
cavalry,
on.
routed the barbarians, and succeeded in breaking through to safety. 37. Such is the art of warfare. Chapter 8. Variation of tactics. The heading means literally the 9 variations, but as Sans it does not appear to enumerate these, and as indeed he has already told us, VSS 611, that such deflections from the ordinary course are practically innumerable. We have little option but to follow Juan Hessa, who says that 9 stands for an indefinitely large number. All it means is that in warfare we ought to vary our tactics to the utmost degree. I do not know what Seo Kung makes these 9 variations out to be, but it has been suggested that they are connected with the 9 situations of chant. Zai, this is the view adopted by Chang Yu.
Just started.
The only other alternative is to suppose that something has been lost, a supposition to which the unusual...
ICS comm check. Can you hear me?
Wait.
Loud and clear.
Sun Tzu said,
Roger that.
the general receives his commands from the sovereign, collects his army and concentrates
ICS
his
comm check.
forces.
Can you hear me?
Repeated from VI.
Loud and clear.
Where it is
Okay.
certainly more in place.
Check landing gear indication
Maybe
extended and transition light
in
off.
order to supply a beginning to the chapter.
Check.
Select LTS on master test switch and verify all lights illuminate.
In country where high
Check.
roads intersect, join
Select
hands
fire
with your
DET
allies.
EXT on master test selector and verify left and right fire, go lights illuminate.
But the last situation is not one
Check.
of the 9 situations as given in the beginning of chat. See if it occurs later on.
Okay, avoiding startup.
43 QVS 43. KLVIU
Alrighty.
defines this situation as being situated across the frontier in hostile territory.
ICS
Each
comm
one
check.
says it is country in
Loud
which
and
there are
clear.
no springs or
Roger.
wells, flocks or herds, vegetables or firewood, chialin, one of gorges, chasms and precipices, without a road by which to advance. In hand, in situations, you must resort to stratagem.
Closing canopy.
Position you
Check.
must fight. 3. There are roads which must not be followed, especially those leading through narrow defiles, says Li Shuan.
Alright, ready to start.
Armies which must be not attacked, or correctly perhaps, there are times when an army must not be attacked. Chen Hao says, when you see your way to obtain a rival advantage, but are powerless to inflict a real defeat, refrain from attacking, for fear of overtaxing your men's strength. Towns which must not be besieged. Shoth, Yes, for Taiso Kong gives an interesting illustration from his own experience. When invading the territory of Hoshu Chu, he ignored the city of Hua, Pai, which lay directly in his path, and pressed on into the heart of the country. This excellent strategy was rewarded by the subsequent capture of no fewer than 14 important district cities. Chang Yu says, no town should be attacked which, if taken, cannot be held, or if left alone, will not cause any trouble. Sun Yi, when urged to attack...
This is Gypsy 1-2 radio check.
The city is small and well fortified. Even if I succeed in taking it will be no great feat of arms. Whereas if I fail,
right.
I shall make myself a laughing stock. In the 17th century, sieges still formed a large proportion of war. It was Turenne who directed attention to the importance of marches, countermarches, and maneuvers. He said, "It is a great mistake to waste men in taking a town, when the same expenditure of soldiers will gain a province." Positions which must not be contested, commands of the sovereign which must not be obeyed. But this is a hard saying for the Chinese, with their reverence for authority, and Wei Liao Tzu, quoted by Chu Mu, is moved to exclaim, "Weapons are baleful instruments. Strife is antagonistic to virtue. A military commander is the negation of civil order." The unpalatable fact remains, however, that even imperial wishes must be subordinated to military necessity. For the general who thoroughly understands the advantages that accompany variation of tactics knows how to handle his troops. 5. A general who does not understand these may be well acquainted with the configuration of the country, yet he will not be able to turn his knowledge to practical account. For literally, get the advantage of the ground, which means not only securing good positions, but availing oneself of natural advantages in every possible way. Chang Yu says, every kind of ground is characterized by certain natural features, and also gives scope for a certain variability of plan. How it is possible to turn these natural features to account unless topographical knowledge is supplemented by versatility of mind. 6. So, a student of war who is unversed in the art of war of varying his ranks, even though he be acquainted with the 5 advantages, will fail to make the best use of his men. Lin tells us that these imply 5 obvious and generally advantageous lines of action, namely, but availing oneself of natural advantages in every possible way. Chang Yu says, every kind of ground is characterized by certain natural features, and also gives scope for a certain variability of plan. How it is possible to turn these natural features to account unless topographical knowledge is supplemented by versatility of mind. 6. So, a student of war who is unversed in the art of war of varying his ranks, even though he be acquainted with the 5 advantages, will fail to make the best use of his men. Lin tells us that these imply 5 obvious and generally advantageous lines of action, namely, if a certain road is short, it must be followed. It must be followed. If an army is isolated, it must be attacked. If a town is in a perilous condition, it must be besieged. If a position can be stormed, it must be besieged. If a position can be stormed, it must be attempted. And if consistent with military operations, the ruler's commands must be obeyed. But there are circumstances which sometimes forbid a general to use these advantages. For instance, a certain road may be the shortest way for him, but if he knows that it abounds in natural obstacles, or that the enemy has laid an ambush on it, he will not follow that road. A hostile force may be open to attack, but if he knows that it is hard, pressed and likely to
We
fall,
are with you.
desperation he will refrain from striking, and so on. 7. Hence, in the wise leader's plans, considerations of advantage and of disadvantage will be blended together, whether in an advantageous position or a disadvantageous one, says Teo Kong. The opposite state should be always present to your mind. 8. If our expectation of advantage be tempered in this way, we may succeed in accomplishing the essential part of our schemes. Tuma says, if we wish to wrest an advantage from the enemy, we must not fix our minds on that alone, but allow
Should be enough for the factory.
enemy also doing some harm to us, and let this enter as a factor into our calculations. 9. If, on the other hand, in the midst of difficulties we are always ready to seize an advantage, we may extricate ourselves from misfortune. Toomey says, if I wish to extricate myself from a dangerous position, I must consider not only the enemy's ability to injure me, but also my own ability to gain an advantage over the enemy.
Ready to
If
taxi.
in my counsels these two considerations are properly blended, I shall succeed in liberating myself. For instance, if I am surrounded by the enemy and only think of effecting an escape, the nervelessness of my policy will incite my adversary to pursue and crush me. It would be far better to encourage my men to deliver a bold counterattack and use the advantage thus gained to free myself from the enemy's toils. See the story
Okay,
of
ready to
Tassau
text
Siege,
Jester?
RVIE, SE35, note 10.
You got it, Bob.
Reduce the hostile
Switching to
troops
tier
by
point 3.
15 damage. Lin enumerates several ways of inflicting this injury, some of which would only occur to the Oriental mind. Entice away the enemy's best and wisest men, so that he may be left without counselors. Introduce traitors into his country, that the government policy may be rendered futile. Phone, intrigue and deceit, and thus sow dissension between the ruler and his ministers. By means of every artful contrivance, cause deterioration amongst his men and waste of his treasure. Corrupt his morals by insidious gifts, leading him into excess. Disturb and unsettle his mind by presenting him with lovely women. Chang Yu, after Wang Hesi, makes a different interpretation of Sun Tzu here. Get the enemy into a position where he must suffer injury, and he will submit of his own accord, and make trouble for them. to mu in this phrase, in his interpretation indicates that trouble should be made for the enemy affecting their possessions, or as we might say, assets, which he considers to be a large army, a rich exchequer, harmony amongst the soldiers, punctual fulfillment of commands. These give us a whip hand over the enemy, and keep them constantly engaged. To literally make servants of them. Tudu says, prevent them from having any rest, hold out specious allurements, and make them rush to any given point. Emin Shai's note contains an excellent example of the idiomatic use of cause them to forget Peel, the reasons for acting otherwise than on their first impulse, and hasten in our direction. 11. The art of war teaches us to rely not on the likelihood of the enemy's not coming, but on our own readiness to receive him, not on the chance of his not attacking, but rather on the fact that we have made our position unassailable. 12. There are 5 dangerous faults which may affect a general. 1. Recklessness, which leads to destruction. Or bravery without forethought, as Desol Kong analyzes it, which causes a man to fight blindly and desperately like a mad bull. Such an opponent, says Chan Yu, must not be encountered with brute force, but may be lured into an ambush and slain. Kef. Adamant. In estimating the character of a general, men are wont to pay exclusive attention to his courage, forgetting that courage is only one out of many qualities which a general should possess. The merely brave man is prone to fight recklessly, and he who fights recklessly, without any perception of what is expedient, must be condemned. So, fire. 2. Makes the incisive remark. Simply going to one's death does not bring about victory. 2. Cowardice, which leads to capture. Cao Kang defines the Chinese word translated here as cowardice as being the man whom timidity prevents from advancing to seize an advantage, and Wang Hezi adds who is quick to flee at the sight of danger. Menshai gives the closer paraphrase, he who is bent on returning alive. This is the man who will never take a risk. But as Sun Tzu knew, nothing is to be achieved in war unless you are willing to take risks. Tai Kung said, he who lets an advantage slip will subsequently bring upon himself real disaster. In 404 AD, Liu Yu pursued the rebel Huan Hoswan up the Yangtze and fought a naval battle with him at the island of Cheng Hung. The loyal troops numbered only a few thousands, while their opponents were in great force. But Huan Hoswan, fearing the fate which was in store for him should he be overcome, had a light boat made fast to the side of his war junk, so that he might escape, if necessary, at a moment's notice. The natural result was that the fighting spirit of his soldiers was utterly quenched, and when the loyalists made an attack from windward with fireships, all striving with the utmost ardor to be first in the fray, Huan Hoswan's forces were routed, had to burn all their baggage, and fled for 2 days, and nights without stopping. Chang Yu tells a somewhat similar story of Kao Ying Chi, a general of the Qin state, who during a battle with the army of Chu in 597 BCO, had a boat kept in readiness for him on the river, wishing in case of defeat to be the first to get across. 3. A hasty temper, which can be provoked by insults. Talmud tells us that Yao Xin, when opposed in 357 AD by Huang Mi, Teng H. Haiyan, and others, shut himself up behind his walls and refused to fight.
What is that?
Teng H. Haiyan said, our adversary is of a choleric temper and easily provoked. Let us make constant sallies and break down his walls. Then he will grow angry
building.
and come out. Once we can bring his force to battle, it is doomed to be our prey. This plan was acted upon. Yao Hasiang came out to fight, was lured as far as San Yuan by the enemy's pretended flight, and finally attacked and slain. 4. A delicacy of honor which is sensitive to shame. This need not be taken to mean that a sense of honor is really a defect in a general. What Sun Tzu condemns is rather an exaggerated sensitiveness to slanderous reports, the thin-skinned man who is stung by opprobrium, however undeserved. Mi Yao. Yao Qin truly observes, though somewhat paradoxically, the seeker after glory should be careless of public opinion. 5. Over solicitude for his men, which exposes him to worry and trouble. And here again, Sun Tzu does not mean that the general is to be careless of the welfare of his troops. All he wishes to emphasize is the danger of sacrificing any important military advantage to the immediate comfort of his men. This is a short-sighted policy because, in the long run, the troops will suffer more from the defeat, or, at best, the prolongation of the war, which will be the consequence. A mistaken feeling of pity will often induce a general to relieve a beleaguered city, or to reinforce a hard-pressed detachment, contrary to his military instincts. It is now generally admitted that our repeated efforts to relieve Ladysmith in the South African War were so many strategical blunders which defeated their own purpose, and in the end, relief came through the very man who started out with the distinct resolve no longer to subordinate the interests of the whole to sentiment in favor of a part. An old soldier and one of our generals who failed most conspicuously in this war tried once, I remember, to defend him to me on the ground that he was always so good to his men. By this plea, had he but known it, he was only condemning him out of Sun Tzu's mouth. 13. These are the 5 besetting sins of a general, ruinous to the conduct of war. 14. When an army is overthrown and its leader slain, the cause will surely be found among these 5 dangerous faults. Let them be a subject of meditation. Chapter 9. The Army on the March. The contents of this interesting chapter are better indicated in S1 than by this heading. 1. Sun Tzu said, we come now to the question of encamping the army and observing signs of the enemy. Pass quickly over mountains and keep in the neighborhood of valleys. The idea is not to linger among barren uplands, but to keep close to supplies of water and grass. Chief, Wu Tzu, H. Chief, provide not in natural ovens, i.e., the openings of valleys. Chang Yu tells the following anecdote. Wu Tu Jiayang was a robber captain in the time of the later Han, and Ma Yuan was sent to exterminate his gang. Chang having found a refuge in the hills, Ma Yuan made no attempt to force a battle, but seized all the favorable positions commanding supplies of water and forage. Chiang was soon in such a desperate plight for want of provisions that he was forced to make a total surrender. He did not know the advantage of keeping in the neighborhood of valleys. 2. Camp in high places, not on high hills, but on knolls or hillocks elevated above the surrounding country, facing the sun. Tu takes this to mean facing south and Shen Hao facing east. Seth, infra, S is 11, 13. Do not climb heights in order to fight. So much for mountain warfare. 3. After crossing a river, you should get far away from it. Hold in order to tempt the enemy to cross after you, according to T. Zao Kung. And also, says Chang Yu, in order not to be impeded in your evolutions. The Tung Tien reads if the enemy crosses a river, etc. But in view of the next sentence, this is almost certainly an interpolation. 4. When an invading force crosses a river in its onward march, do not advance to meet it in midstream. It will be best to let half the army get across and then deliver your attack.
Okay, there's dirt at 8 o'clock.
Alludes to the great victory
11
won
o'clock.
by Han
Roger that.
over
Not able.
Nanchu at the Wei River, turning to the Cheyenne Han Shu, H. 34, 3rd. 6th verso, we find the battle described as follows. The 2 armies were drawn up on opposite sides of the river. In the night, Han Hasten ordered his men to take some 10,000 sacks filled with sand and construct a dam higher up. Then, leading half his army across, he attacked Lanchu, but after a time, pretending to have failed in his attempt, he hastily withdrew to the other bank. Lang Chu was much elated by this unlooked for success and exclaiming, I felt sure that Han Hansin was really a coward. He pursued him and began crossing the river in his turn. Han Hasin now sent a party to cut open the sandbags, thus releasing a great volume of water, which swept down and prevented the greater portion of Lang Chu's army from getting across. He then turned upon the force, which had been cut off, and annihilated it, Lang Chu himself being amongst the slain. The rest of the army on the further bank also scattered and fled in all directions. 5. If you are anxious to fight, you should not go to meet the invader near a river which he has to cross, for fear of preventing a crossing. 6. Moor your craft higher up than the enemy and facing the sun. See Supra, SS2. The repetition of these words in connection with water
Hey, I
is
got
very
dirt at
important.
7 o'clock
Chang
and
Yun, as
dirt
the note,
1 o'clock.
said either of troops marshaled on the riverbank or of boats anchored in the stream itself. In either case, it is essential to be higher than the enemy and facing the sun. The other commentators are not at all explicit. Do not move up stream to meet the enemy. Tutum says, as water flows downwards, we must not pitch our camp on the lower reaches of a river, for fear the enemy should open the sluices and sweep us away in a flood. Chu Ko Wu, who has remarked that in river warfare we must not advance against the stream, which is as much as to say that our fleet must not be anchored below that of the enemy, for then they would be able to take advantage of the current and make short work of us. There is also the danger, noted by other commentators, that the enemy may throw poison on the water to be carried down to us. So much for real warfare. 7. In crossing salt marshes, your sole concern should be to get over them quickly, without any delay. Because of the lack of fresh water, the poor quality of the herbage, and last but not least, because they are low, flat, and exposed to attack. 8. If forced to fight in a salt marsh, you should have water and grass near you, and get your back to a clump of trees. Ari Chuan remarks that the ground is less likely to be treacherous where there are trees, while Tuman says that they will serve to protect the rear. So much for operations in salt marshes. 9. In dry, level country, take up
Friendly
an easy
guerrilla
accessible
group
position
bearing
with rising ground to your
020,
right,
92 miles,
and on your
Angels
rear.
3. Okay, we got dirt at 2 o'clock.
Is saying an army should have a stream or a marsh on its left and a hill or tumulus on its right, so that the danger may be in front and safety lie behind. So much for campaigning in flat country. 10. These are the 4 useful branches of military knowledge. Those, namely, concerned with 1. Mountains, 2. Rivers, 3. Marshes, and
Bandit
4.
3 ships,
plains.
raw, 010,
Compare
175 miles.
Napoleon's
Yep, that's dirt at 11 o'clock.
which enabled the Yellow Emperor to vanquish 4 several sovereigns. Regarding the Yellow Emperor, Miao Chen asks with some plausibility whether there is an error in the text, as nothing is known of Huang Tai having conquered 4 other emperors. The Shai Chi, J1 and Init, speaks only of his victories over Yenpai and Aqian Heu. In the Liu Tao, it is mentioned that he fought 70 battles and pacified the empire. Seo Kung's explanation is that the Yellow Emperor was the first to institute the feudal system of vassals princes, each of whom, to the number of 4, originally bore the title of emperor. Li Chuan tells us that the art of war originated under Huang Ti, who received it from his minister Feng Hao. 11. All armies prefer high ground to low. The high ground, says Mei Yao Chen, is not only more agreeable and salubrious, but more convenient from a military point of view. Low ground is not only damp and unhealthy, but also disadvantageous for fighting, and sunny places to dark. 12. If you are careful of your men, Tzu Kang says, make for fresh water and pasture,
Oh, I
where
got
you can turn
nails
out
on
your
our nose,
arrows
12
to
o'clock.
graze. And camp on hard ground, the army will be free from disease of every kind. Chang Yu says, the dryness of the climate will prevent the outbreak of illness, and this will spell victory. 13. When you come to a hill or a bank, occupy the sunny side, with the slope on your right rear. Thus, you will at once act for the benefit of your soldiers and utilize the natural advantages of the ground. 14. When, in consequence of heavy rains up country, a river which you wish to ford is swollen and flecked with foam, you must wait until it subsides. 15. Country in which there are precipitous cliffs with torrents running between, deep natural hollows, the latter defined as places enclosed on every side by steep banks, with pools of water.
Alright, I
at
got
the
dirt
bottom.
at 4 o'clock.
Confined places, defined as natural pens or prisons or places, surrounded by precipices on 3 sides, easy to get into, but hard to get out of. Tangled thickets, defined as places covered with such dense undergrowth that spears cannot be used. Quagmires, defined as low-lying places, so
Oh, I
heavy
got
with
dirt
mud
at
as
2
to be
o'clock.
impossible for chariots and horsemen. And crevasses, defined by Mi Yao Chen as a narrow, difficult way between beetling cliffs. To Mu's note, is ground covered with trees and rocks, and intersected by numerous ravines and pitfalls. This is very vague, but Chia Lian explains it clearly enough as a defile or narrow pass, and Zhang Yu takes much the same view. On the whole, the weight of the commentators certainly inclines to the rendering defile, but the ordinary meaning of the Chinese in one place is a crack or fissure. And the fact that the meaning of the Chinese elsewhere in the sentence indicates something in the nature of
140 miles.
make me think that Sun Tzu is here speaking of crevasses.
I got
Should be
some dirt
left
at
with all
5 o'clock
possible speed
and
and not
dirt
approach.
11 o'clock.
60. While we keep away from such places, we should get the enemy to approach them. While we face them, we should let the enemy have them on his rear. If in the neighborhood of your camp there should be any hilly country, ponds surrounded by aquatic grass, hollow basins filled with reeds, or woods with thick undergrowth, they must be carefully routed out and searched, for these are places where men in ambush or insidious spies are likely to be, lurking. Chang Yu has the note. We must also be on our guard against traitors who may lie in close covert, secretly spying out our weaknesses and overhearing our instructions. 18. When the enemy is close at hand and remains quiet, he is relying on the natural strength of his position. And here begins Sun Tzu's remarks on the reading of signs, much of which is so good that it would almost be included in a modern manual like General Batten, Powell's Aids to Scouting. 19. When he keeps aloof and tries to provoke a battle, he is anxious for the other side to advance. Probably because we are in a strong position from which he wishes to dislodge us. If he came close up to us, says to move, and try and force a battle, he would seem to despise us, and there would be less probability of our responding to the challenge. 20. If his place of encampment is easy of access, he is tendering a bait. 21. Movement amongst the trees or forest shows that the enemy is advancing. Beto Kung explains this as filling trees to clear a passage, and Chang Yu says, every man sends out scouts to climb high places and observe the enemy. If a scout sees that the trees of the forest are moving and shaking, he may know that they are being cut down to clear a passage for the enemy's march. The appearance of a number of screens in the midst of thick grass means that the enemy wants to make us suspicious. Tu Yu's explanation, borrowed from T.S.O. Kun's, is as follows. The presence of a number of screens or sheds in the midst of thick vegetation is a sure sign that the enemy has fled and, fearing pursuit, has constructed these hiding places in order to make us suspect an ambush. It appears that these screens were hastily knotted together out of any long grass, which the retreating enemy happened to come across. 22. The rising of birds in their flight is the sign of an ambuscade. Chang Yu's explanation is doubtless right. When birds that are flying along in a straight line suddenly shoot upwards, it means that soldiers are in ambush at the spot beneath. Startled beasts indicate the sudden attack is coming. 23. When there is dust rising in a high column, it is the sign of chariots advancing. When the dust is low but spread over a wide area, it betokens the approach of infantry. A high and sharp, or rising to a peak, is of course somewhat exaggerated as applied to dust. The commentators explain the phenomenon by saying that horses and chariots, being heavier than men, raise more dust and also follow one another in the same wheel track, whereas foot soldiers would be marching in ranks, many abreast. According to Chang Yu, every army on the march must have scouts some way in advance, who on sighting dust raised by the enemy will gallop back and report it to the commander-in-chief, Chef, General Batten. As you move along, say, in a hostile country, your eyes should be looking afar for the enemy or any signs of him. Figures, dust rising, birds getting up, glitter of arms, etc., glitter of arms, etc. When it branches out in different directions, it shows that parties have been sent to collect firewood. A few clouds of dust moving to and fro signify that the army is encamping. Chang Yu says, in apportioning the defenses for a cantonment, light horse will be sent out to survey the position and ascertain the weak and strong points all along its circumference, hence the small quantity of dust in its motion. 24.
I've got some dirt at 3 o'clock.
Increased preparations are signs that the enemy is about to advance.
No, there's dirt at 2
they
o'clock.
stood in great fear of us, says Tumu. Their object is to make us contemptuous and careless, after which they will attack us. Chang Yu alludes to the story of Tian Tan of the Qi Long against the Yen forces, led by Ji Qi, Chi, in H. 82 of the Shi'ai we read. Tian Tan openly said, "My only fear is that the Yen army may cut off the noses of their HI prisoners and place them in the front rank to fight against us. That would be the undoing of our city." The other side, being informed of this speech, at once acted on the being informed of this speech,
Wilco.
at once acted on the suggestion. But those within the city were enraged at seeing their fellow countrymen thus mutilated, and fearing only lest they should fall into the enemy's hands, were nerved to defend themselves more obstinately than ever. Once again, Tian Tan sent back converted spies who reported these words to the enemy. The enemy.
Oh, I got some dirt
What
at
I
10
dread
o'clock.
most is that the men of Yen may dig up the ancestral tombs
Roger.
outside the town, and by inflicting this indignity on our forefathers cause us to become faint-hearted. Forthwith the besiegers dug up all the graves and burned the corpses lying in them. And the inhabitants of Chai, Mo, witnessing the outrage from the city walls, wept passionately and were all impatient to go out and fight, their fury being increased tenfold. Tian Tan knew then that his soldiers were ready for any enterprise, but instead of a sword, he himself took a mattock in his hands and ordered others to be distributed amongst his best warriors, while the ranks were filled up with their wives and concubines. He then served out all the remaining rations and bade his
Yep,
men
that's
eat
dirt at
their
11
fill.
o'clock.
The
I
regular
got a lock.
soldiers were told to
Fight
keep
the
out
friendly.
of sight, and the walls were manned with
Target,
the old and weaker
70
men
miles.
with women. This done, envoys were dispatched to the enemy's camp to
Wilco.
arrange terms of surrender, whereupon the Yen army began shouting
I
for
got some
joy.
dirt at 5
Tian
o'clock.
Tan also
And,
collected
dirt,
20,000
3
ounces
o'clock.
of silver from the people and got the wealthy citizens of Chai Mo to send it to the Yen general with the prayer that when the town capitulated, he would not allow their homes to be plundered or their women to be maltreated. Che, in high good humor, granted their prayer, but his army now became increasingly slack and careless. Meanwhile, Tian Tan got together 1,000 oxen, decked them with pieces of red silk, painted their bodies, dragon-like with colored stripes, and fastened sharp blades on their horns and well-greased rushes on their tails. When night came on, he lighted the ends of the rushes and drove the oxen through a number of holes which he had pierced in the walls, backing them up with a force of 5,000 picked warriors. The animals, maddened with pain, dashed furiously into the enemy's camp where they caused the utmost confusion and dismay, for their tails acted as torches, showing up the hideous pattern on their bodies, and the weapons on their horns killed or wounded any with whom they came into contact.
Yep, roger
In
that.
the meantime, the band of 5,000 had crept up with gags in their mouths, and now threw themselves on the enemy. At the same moment, a frightful din rose in the city
You
itself.
spiked it, buddy!
All those
Alrighty.
that remained behind, making as much noise as possible by banging drums and hammering on bronze vessels.
I got dirt at 10
until
o'clock.
heaven and
And,
earth
dirt,
convulsed by
11
the
o'clock.
uproar. Terror-stricken, the Yen army fled in disorder, hotly pursued by the
Roger
men
that.
of H.E., who succeeded in slaying their general H.I. Cheyenne. The result of the battle was the ultimate recovery of some 70 cities which had belonged to the H.I. state. Violent
Spiking him.
language and
That's a
driving
friendly.
forward as if to the attack are signs that he will retreat.
Yes,
25.
sir.
When the light chariots come out first and take up a position on the wings, it is a sign that the enemy is forming for battle. 26. Peace proposals unaccompanied by a sworn covenant indicate a plot. The reading here is uncertain. Li Xuan
Got it.
indicates a treaty confirmed by oaths and hostages. Wang Haixi and Chang Yu, on the other hand, simply say without reason, on a frivolous pretext. 27. And there is much running about.
Now he's locking us at 11 o'clock.
Took a place under his own regimental banner, and the soldiers fall into rank. It means that the critical moment has come. 28. When some are seen advancing and some retreating, it is a lure. 29. When the soldiers stand leaning on their spears, they are faint from want of food. 30. If those who are sent to draw water begin by drinking themselves, the army is suffering from thirst. As Drew remarks, one may know the condition
locked
of
the
an
friendly.
army from the behavior of a single man. 31.
I've got dirt at
If the
5
enemy
o'clock.
sees an
And,
advantage to be
dirt,
gained, it
7
makes no
o'clock.
effort to secure
Target,
it. The
21
soldiers are
miles.
exhausted. 32. If birds gather on any spot, it
I've
is
got some dirt,
unoccupied.
12 o'clock.
Truly useful fact to bear in mind when, for instance, as Sheridan says, the enemy has secretly abandoned his camp. Clamor by night betokens nervousness.
No, I've got dirt at 6 o'clock. We lost a friendly.
The general's authority is weak.
Not able.
If the banners and flags are shifted about the seditions afoot, if the officers are angry, it means that the men are weary. Q.U. understands the sentence differently. If all the officers of an army are angry with their general, it means that they are broken with fatigue, owing to the exertions which he has demanded from them. 34. When an army feeds its horses with grain and kills its cattle for food, to the ordinary course of things, the men would be fed on grain and the horses chiefly on grass.
That's a FAT.
And when the men do not hang their cooking pots over the camp, fires showing that they will not return to their tents, you may know that they are determined to fight to the death. I may quote here the illustrative passage from the Hao Han Shu, age 71, given in abbreviated form by the PI when the rebel Wang Ku of Liang was besieging the town of Chen, Tian and Huan Fu Sun, who was in supreme command, and Tan Cho was sent out against him. The latter pressed for hasty measures, but Sun turned a deaf ear to his counsel. At last the rebels were utterly worn out and began to throw down their weapons of their own accord. Sun was not advancing to the attack, but Cho said, "It is a principle of war not to pursue desperate men, and not to pursue desperate men, and not to press a retreating host." Sun answered, "That does not apply here. What I am about to attack is a jaded army, not a retreating host. With disciplined troops, I am falling on a disorganized multitude, not a band of desperate men." Thereupon he advances to the attack unsupported by his colleague and routed the enemy
looks like mud, 9 o'clock.
35.
Okay, Roger.
The sight of men whispering together in small nods or speaking in subdued tones points to disaffection amongst the rank and file. 36. Too frequent rewards signify that the enemy is at the end of his resources, because when an army is hard-pressed, as Tulu says, there is always fear and lavish rewards are given to keep the men in good temper. Too many punishments betray a condition of dire distress, because in such case discipline becomes relaxed, and unwanted severity is necessary to keep the men to their duty. 37. To begin by blustering, but afterwards to take fright at the enemy's numbers, shows a supreme lack of intelligence. I follow the interpretation of Tessé Kong, also adopted by Li Xuan, Tulu, and Chang Yu, another possible meaning set forth by Tulu, Chia Lin, Mei Tao Chen, Wang Hasai, is the general who's first tyrannical towards his men, and then in terror, lest they should mutiny, etc. This would connect the sentence with what went before about rewards and punishments. 38. When envoys are sent with compliments in their mouths, it is a sign that the enemy wishes for a truce. Tulu says, if the enemy open friendly relations be sending hostages, it is a sign that they are anxious for an armistice, either because their strength is exhausted or for some other reason. But it hardly needs a Sun Tzu to draw such an obvious inference. 39. If the enemy's troops march up angrily and remain facing ours for a long time, without either joining battle or taking themselves off again, the situation is one that demands great vigilance and circumspection. Axel Khan says a maneuver of this sort may be only a ruse to gain time for an unexpected flank attack or the laying of an ambush. 40. If our troops are no more in number than the enemy, that is amply sufficient. It only means that no direct attack can be made. For literally no martial advance, that is to say, chain tactics and frontal attacks must be eschewed, and stratagem resorted to instead. What we can do is simply to concentrate all our available strength, keep a close watch on the enemy, and obtain reinforcements. But this is an obscure sentence, and none of the commentators succeed in squeezing very good sense out of it. I follow Li Xuan, who appears to offer the simplest explanation. Over the sun, it gets more men will win. Fortunately, we have Chang Yu to expound its meaning to us in which is lucidity itself. When the numbers are even and no favorable opening presents itself, although we may not be strong enough to deliver a sustained attack, we can find additional recruits amongst our
Oh shit! 247!
and then concentrating our forces and keeping a close watch on the enemy, contrive to snatch the victory. We should avoid borrowing foreign soldiers.
I was not paying attention.
He then quotes from Lao Tzu, Chen 3, the nominal strength of 100,000, but their real value will be not more than makes light of his opponents is surely captured by them. Bo Chen Hao, quoting from the Tao So Chuan, says, if bees and scorpions carry poison, how much more will a hostile state? Even a puny opponent, then, should not be treated with contempt. 42. If soldiers are punished before they have grown attached to you, they will not prove submissive. And unless submissive, then will be practically useless. If, when the soldiers have become attached to you, punishments are not enforced, they will still be useless. 43. Soldiers must be treated in the first instance with humanity, but kept under control by means of iron discipline. Then Suab C. 493 said of Su Mei Jiang, his civil virtues endeared him to the people. His martial prowess kept his enemies in awe. Kef Yu Tzu changed for in it. The ideal commander unit's culture with a warlike temper. The profession of arms requires a combination of hardness and tenderness. This is a certain road to victory.
Okay.
If in training soldiers
sucky frame rate
the
we got
army
so
will be
late.
well disciplined.
Oh my
If
god.
not, its discipline will be bad.
What's
45.
happening, man?
If a general shows confidence in his men but always insists on his orders being obeyed,
I think you haven't armed your ejection seat.
a general ought in time of peace to show kindly
Closing canopy.
We're
Check.
just dealing
also
with
make his authority respected.
abnormal
So that
frame
when they
rate.
come to face the enemy, orders may be executed and discipline maintained.
Alright, ready to start.
What Sun Tzu has said in S44, however, would lead one rather to expect something like this. If a general is always confident that his orders will be carried out, etc., the gain will be mutual. Chang Yu says, the general has confidence in the men under his command, and the men are docile, having confidence in him. Thus the gain is mutual. He quotes a pregnant sentence from Wai Liao Tusu, H. 4. The art of giving orders is not to try to rectify minor blunders, and not to be swayed by petty doubts. Vacillation and fussiness are the surest means of sapping the confidence of an army. One aids to scouting, P26.
So frustrating with
Chapter
just
X.
you arm the bombs, you prime the bombs, you set fuse the bombs, you set them on Red Bull, you're going to drop them, you're hot, you fucking X16 near, and
the 6 calamities
no.
are discussed in SS 1420, and the rest of the chapter is again a mere string of desultory remarks, though not less interesting, perhaps, on that account. 1. Sun Tzu
And then you fumble and it's like,
six kinds of terrain, to wit. 1.
like described in the Art of War.
Some
or so.
Yao, Chen says, plentifully provided with roads and means of communications. 2. Entangling ground. The same commentator says, net-like country, venturing into which you become entangled. 3. Temporizing ground. Ground which allows you to stave off or delay. 4. Narrow passes. 5. Precipitous heights. 6. Positions at a great distance from the enemy. It is hardly necessary to point out the faultiness of this classification. A strange lack of logical perception is shown in the Chinaman's unquestioning acceptance of glaring cross-divisions such as the above. 2. Ground which can be freely traversed by both sides is called accessible. 3. With regard to ground of this nature, be before the enemy in occupying the raised and sunny spots, and carefully guard your line of supplies. But the general meaning of the last phrase is doubtlessly, as Tu Yu says, not to allow the enemy to cut your communications. In view of Napoleon's dictum, the secret of war lies in the communications. To an air we could wish that Sun Tzu had done more than skirt the edge of this important subject here and in it. Colonel Henderson says, the line of supply may be said to be as vital to the existence of an army as the heart to the life of a human being, just as the duelist, who finds his adversary's point menacing him with certain death, and his own guard astray, is compelled to conform to his adversary's movements, and to content himself with warding off his thrusts, so the commander whose communications are suddenly threatened finds himself in a false position, and he will be fortunate if he has not to change all his plans, to split up his force into more or less isolated detachments, and to fight with inferior numbers on ground which he has not had time to prepare, and where defeat will not be an ordinary failure, but will entail the ruin or surrender of his whole army. Then you will be able to fight with advantage. 4. Ground which can be abandoned but is hard to reoccupy is called entangling. 5. From a position of this sort, if the enemy is unprepared, you may sally forth and defeat him. But if the enemy is prepared for your coming, and you fail to defeat him, then return being impossible, disaster will ensue. 6. When the position is such that neither side will gain by making the first move, it is called temporizing ground. Toomey says, each side finds it inconvenient to move, and the situation remains...
We're ready to taxi.
7. In a position of this sort, even though the enemy should offer us an attractive bait, Tulu says, turning their backs on us and pretending to flee. But this is only one of the lures which might induce us to quit our position. It will be advisable not to stir forth, but rather to retreat, thus enticing the enemy in his turn. Then, when part of his army has come out, we may deliver our attack with advantage. 8. With regard to narrow passes, if you can occupy them first, let them be strongly garrisoned and await the advent of the enemy, because then, as Tulu observes, the initiative will lie with us, and by making sudden and unexpected attacks, we shall have the enemy at our mercy. 9. Should the
These
enemy
are still
force you in occupying a
content,
pass, do not go after him if the pass is fully garrisoned, but only if it is weakly garrisoned. 10. With regard to precipitous heights forehand with your adversary, you should occupy the raised and sunny spots, and then wait for him to come up. Sao Khan says, the particular advantage of securing heights and defiles is that your actions cannot then be dictated by the enemy. With the enunciation of the grand principle alluded to Sivai, SS2, Chan Yu tells the following anecdote of P.H. Singh, Chien A.D. 619-682, who was sent on a punitive expedition against the Turkic tribes. At night, he pitched his camp as usual, and it had already been completely fortified by wall and ditch, when suddenly he gave orders that the army should shift its quarters to a hill nearby. This was highly displeasing to his officers, who protested loudly against the extra fatigue which it would entail on the men. Paid King Cheyenne, however, paid no heed to their remonstrances and had the camp
Chief, disconnect everything
as possible. The same night, a terrific storm came on,
Chief, disconnect
which flooded
everything.
their former place of encampment to the depth of over 12 feet. The recalcitrant officers were amazed at the sight and owned that they had been in the wrong. How did you know what was going to happen? They asked. Pei Singh, Cheyenne replied. From this time forward, be content to obey orders without asking unnecessary questions. From this it may be seen, Chang Yu continues, that high and sunny places are advantageous, not only for fighting, but also because they are immune from disastrous flight. 11. If the enemy has occupied them before you, do not follow him, but retreat and try to entice him away. The turning point of Li Shai, Min's campaign, in 621 AD, against the two rebels, Tao Shen, Ti, king of Asya, and Wang Shai-e-Chang, prince of Cheng, was his seizure of the heights of Wu Lao, in spite of which Tu Chien persisted in his attempt to relieve his ally in Lo. Yang was defeated and taken prisoner. Si Chiu Tang Shu, Chu Fo, Phi Versa, and also H-54. 12. If you are situated at a great distance from the enemy, and the strength of the two armies is equal, it is not easy to provoke a battle. The point is that we must not think of undertaking a long and wearisome march, at the end of which, as Tulu says, we should be exhausted and our adversary fresh and keen, and fighting will be to your disadvantage. 13. These 6 are the principles connected with earth. Saw perhaps the principles relating to ground. See, however, S8. The general who has attained a responsible post must be careful to study them. 14. Now an army is exposed to 6 several calamities, not arising from natural causes, but from faults for which the general is responsible. These are 1. Flight. 2. Insubordination. 3. Collapse. 4. Ruin. 5. Disorganization. 3. Collapse. 4. Ruin. 5. Disorganization. 6. 15. Other conditions being equal, if one force is hurled against another 10 times its size, the result would be the flight of the former. 16. When the common soldiers are too strong and their officers too weak, The result is insubordination.
Copy.
Tu
Switching
Mu
to
cites the
Tier 3.
unhappy case of Tian Pu, Washington Tang Shu, age 148, who was sent away in 820, 1 AD, with orders to lead an army against Wang Ting, Qin Su. But the whole time he was in command, his soldiers treated him with the utmost contempt and openly flouted his authority by riding about the camp on donkeys, several thousands at a time. Tian Pu was powerless to put a stop to this conduct, and when, after some months had passed, he made an attempt to engage the enemy, his troops turned tail and dispersed in every direction. After that, the unfortunate man committed suicide by cutting his throat. When the officers are too strong and the common soldiers too weak, the result is collapse. Setso Kong says, the officers are energetic and want to press on. The common soldiers are feeble and suddenly collapse. 17. When the higher officers are angry and insubordinate, they don't meet the enemy in battle on their own account from a feeling of resentment before the commander-in-chief can tell whether or no he is in a position to fight. The result is ruin. To Wang Hassi's notice, this means the general is angry without cause, and at the same time does not appreciate the ability of his subordinate officers. Thus, he arouses fierce resentment and brings an avalanche of ruin upon his head. 18. When the general is weak and without authority, when his orders are not clear and distinct,
Friendly, 015, 55 miles, Angel 6.
Says, if the commander gives his orders with decision, the soldiers will not wait to hear them twice. If his moves are made without vacillation, the soldiers will not be in two minds about doing their duty. General Barton, Powell says, italicizing the words, the secret of getting successful work out of your trained men lies in one nutshell, in the clearness of the instructions they receive. With the clearness of the instructions they receive. Also, Wood Suo, 3. The most effective effect in a military leader is difference. The worst calamities that befall an army arise from hesitation, when there are no fixed duties assigned to officers and men. Tooley says, neither officers nor men have any regular routine, and the ranks are formed in a slovenly, haphazard manner. The result is utter disorganization. 19. When a general, unable to estimate the enemy's strength, allows an inferior force to engage a larger one, or hurls a weak detachment against a powerful one, and neglects to place picked soldiers in the front rank, the result must be a rout. Chang Yu paraphrases the latter part of the sentence and continues, whenever there is fighting to be done, the keenest spirits should be appointed to serve in the front ranks, both in order to strengthen the resolution of our own men to demoralize the enemy. Ken. The Primi Ordenes of Caesar de Bello Gallico, v. 2844, et al. 20. These are 6 ways of courting defeat, which must be carefully noted by the general who has attained a responsible post. See Supra S13. 21. The natural formation of the country is the soldier's best ally. Zhang Hao says, the advantages of weather and season are not equal to those connected with ground, but a power of estimating the adversary, of controlling the forces of victory, and of shrewdly calculating difficulties, dangers, and distances, constitutes the test of a great general. 22. He who knows these things and in fighting puts his knowledge into practice will win his battles. He who knows them not, nor practices them, will surely be defeated. 23. If fighting is sure to result in victory, then you must fight, even though the ruler forbid it. If fighting will not result in victory, then you must not fight, even at the ruler's bidding. Chef, VI S3 Phil. Guan Shi, Kong of the 8 Qin dynasty, who is said to have been the patron of Chang Liang, and to have written the Sanlue, has these words attributed to him. The responsibility of setting an army in motion must devolve on the general alone. If advance and retreat are controlled from the palace, brilliant results will hardly be achieved. Hence, the godlike ruler and the enlightened monarch are content to play a humble part in furthering their country's cause lit. Kneel down to push the chariot wheel. This means that in matters lying outside the Zanana, the decision of the military commander must be absolute. Chang Yu also quote the saying, decrees from the Son of Heaven do not penetrate the walls of a camp. 24.
Oh, I
The
got
general
nails
who
on our nose
advances
at 12
without
o'clock.
coveting fame and retreats without fearing disgrace. It was Wellington, I think, who said that the hardest thing of all for a soldier is to retreat, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service for his sovereign, is the jewel of the kingdom. Tay a noble presentiment in few words, of the Chinese happy warrior. Such a man, says Ho Shai, even if he had to suffer punishment, would not regret his conduct. 25. Regard your soldiers as your children, and they will follow you into the deepest valleys. Look on them as your own beloved sons, and they will stand by you even unto death. IS-6. In this connection, Tumu draws for us an engaging picture of the famous General Wu Chia, from whose treatise on war I have frequently had occasion to quote. He wore the same clothes and ate the same food as the meanest of his soldiers, refused to have either a horse to ride or a mat to sleep on, carried his own surplus rations wrapped in a parcel, and shared every hardship with his men. One of his soldiers was suffering from an abscess, and Wu Chi himself sucked out the virus. The soldier's mother, hearing this, began wailing and lamenting. Somebody asked her, saying, "Why do you cry? Your son is only a common soldier, and yet the commander-in-chief himself has sucked the
Hey, I
poison
got some
from
dirt
his
at
soul."
11 o'clock.
The woman replied, "Many years ago, Lord Wu performed a similar service for my husband, who never left him afterwards, and finally met his death at the hands of the enemy. And now that he has done the same for my son, he too will fall fighting. I know not where."
Whoa,
Each
I
one
got dirt
mentions
at
the
1 o'clock.
Viscount of Eichu, who invaded the small state of Hishu, who invaded the small state of Hashan during the winter. The Duke of Shan said to him, "Many of the soldiers are suffering severely from the cold." So he made a round of the whole army, comforting and encouraging the men. And straightway they felt as if they were clothed in garments lined with floss silk. 26. If, however, you are indulgent, but unable to make your authority felt, kind-hearted, but unable to enforce your commands, and incapable, moreover, of quelling disorder, then your soldiers must be likened to spoiled children. They are useless for any practical purpose. Dali Cheng once said that if you could make your soldiers afraid of you, they would not be afraid of the enemy. Tumu recalls an instance of stern military discipline, which occurred in 219 AD, when Lu Men was occupying the town of Chiang. Ling Lin was occupying the town of Chiang.
Yes, sir.
He had given stringent orders to his army not to molest the inhabitants, nor take anything from them by force. Nevertheless, a certain officer serving under his banner, who happened to be a fellow townsman, ventured to appropriate a bamboo hat belonging to one of the people in order to wear it over his regulation helmet as a protection against the rain. Lu
Good,
Men
at 1
considered that
o'clock.
the fact of his being also a native of Junan should not be allowed to palliate a clear breach of discipline, and accordingly he ordered his summary execution, the tears rolling down his face. However, as he did so, this act of severity filled the army with awesome awe, and from that time forth even articles dropped in the highway were not picked up. 27. If we know that our own men are in a condition to attack, but are unaware that the enemy is not open to attack, we have gone only halfway towards victory. That is, Zhao Kang says, the issue in this case is uncertain. 28. If we know that the enemy is open to attack, but are unaware that our own men are not in a condition to attack,
No,
we
he's
have
still
gone
active.
only halfway towards victory. 29. If we know that the enemy is open to attack, and also know that our men are in a condition to attack, but are unaware that the nature of the ground makes fighting
I got some dirt at 5 o'clock.
we have still gone only halfway towards victory. 30. Hence the experienced soldier, once in motion, is never bewildered. Once he has broken camp, he is never at a loss. But the reason being, according to Tu Mu, that he has taken his measures so thoroughly as to ensure victory beforehand. He does not move recklessly, says Chang Yu, so that when he does move, he makes no mistakes. 31. Hence the saying, if you know the enemy and know yourself, your victory will not stand in doubt. If you know heaven and know earth, you may make your victory complete. Li Chuan sums up as follows. Given a knowledge of three things, the affairs of men, the seasons of heaven, and the natural advantages of earth, victory will invariably crown your battles. One si pensis de Napoleon Monaire. No, 47. 2. The Science of War chap. 2. 3 aids to scouting PXE. XE. Chapter 11. The 9 situations. 1. Sun Tzu said, the art of war recognizes 9 varieties of ground. 1. Dispersive ground. 2. Facile ground. 2. Facile ground. 3. Contentious ground. 4. Open ground. 5. Ground of intersecting highways. 6. Serious ground. 7. Difficult ground. Net. Difficult ground. 2. When a chieftain is fighting in his own territory, it is dispersive ground. So called because the soldiers, being near to their homes and anxious to see their wives and children, are likely to seize the opportunity afforded by a battle and scatter in every direction. In their advance, observes to move, they will lack the valor of desperation, and when they retreat, they will find harbors of refuge. 3. When he has penetrated into hostile territory, but to no great distance, it is facile ground. Arichuan and Ho Shi say because of the facility for retreating, and the other commentators give similar explanations. Tulu remarks, when your army has crossed the border, you should burn your boats and bridges in order to make it clear to everybody that you have no hankering after home. 4. Ground the possession of which imports great advantage to either side is contentious ground. Chu Mu defines the ground as ground to be contended for. Seo Kang says, ground on which the few and the weak can defeat the many and the strong, such as the neck of a pass, instanced by Lichuan. Thus, Thermopylae was of this classification, because the possession of it,
Oh dear.
for a few days only, meant holding the entire invading army in check, and thus gaining invaluable time. Chef Wutsu HEV aiding it. For those who have to fight in the ratio of 1 to 10, there is nothing better than a narrow pass. When Liu Kuan was returning from his triumphant expedition to Turkestan in 385 AD, and had got as far as Ho, laden with spoils, Liang Heisi, administrator of Liangsha, taking advantage of the death of Fu Qin, king of Chen, taking advantage of the death of Fu Qin king, and was for barring his way into the province. Yang Han, governor of Kao Chang, counseled him, saying, Lu Kuan is fresh from his victories in the west, and his soldiers are vigorous and mettlesome. If we oppose him in the shifting sands of the desert, we shall be no match for him, and we must therefore try a different plan. Let us hasten to occupy the defile at the mouth of the Kao Wu Pass, thus cutting him off from supplies of water, and when his troops are prostrated with thirst, we can dictate our own terms without moving. Or if you think that the pass I mention is too far off, we could make a stand against him at the Aiyu Pass, which is nearer. The cunning and resource of Su Fang himself would be expended in vain against the enormous strength of these two positions.
Oh dear.
Liang Hesi, refusing to act on this advice, was overwhelmed and swept away by the invader. 5. Ground on which each side has liberty of movement is open ground. There are various interpretations of the Chinese adjective for this type of ground. Zhou says it means ground covered with a network of roads like a chessboard. Oh, she suggested, ground on which intercommunication is easy. 6. Ground which forms the key to 3 contiguous states. That's how Kung defines this as our country adjoining the enemies and a third country contiguous with both. Meng Shi instances the small principality of Chen, which was bounded on the north-east by Hai, on the west by Qin, and on the south by Chu, on the west by Chu. So
Bandit
the he
26,
who
right?
occupies it first has most of the empire at his command. The belligerent who holds this dominating position can constrain most of them to become his
Guy that's
allies.
jamming.
Is ground of intersecting highways. 7. When an army has penetrated into the heart of a hostile country, leaving a number of fortified cities in its rear, it is serious ground. Tuan Hasi explains the name by saying that when an army has reached such a point, its situation is serious. 8. Mountain forests, or simply forests. Rugged steeps, marshes and fens. All country that is hard to traverse. This is difficult ground. 9. Ground which is reached through narrow gorges, and from which we can only return by tortuous paths, so that a small number of the enemy would suffice to crush a large body of our men. This is hemmed in ground. 10. Ground on which we can only be saved from destruction by fighting without delay is desperate ground. The situation, as pictured by T.S. Alcon, is very similar to the Hand, in ground, except that here escape is no longer possible. A lofty mountain in front, a large river behind, advance impossible, retreat blocked. Chen Hao says, to be on desperate ground is like sitting in a leaking boat or crouching in a burning house. Jiwa quotes from Li Qing, a vivid description of the plight of an army thus entrapped. Suppose an army invading hostile territory without the aid of local guides. It falls into a fatal snare and is at the enemy's mercy. A ravine on the left, a mountain on the right, a pathway so perilous that the pathway so perilous that the pathway so perilous that horses have to be roped together and the chariots carried in slings. No passage open in front, retreat cut off behind. No choice but to proceed in single file. Then, before there is time to range our soldiers in order of battle, the enemy's overwhelming strength suddenly appears on the scene. Advancing, we can nowhere take a breathing space. Retreating, we have no haven of refuge. We seek a pitched battle, but in vain. Yet standing on the defensive, none of us has a moment's respite. If we simply maintain our ground, whole days and months will crawl by. The moment we make a move, we have to sustain the enemy's attacks on front and rear. The country is wild, destitute of water and plants. The army is lacking in the necessaries of life. The horses are jaded and the men worn out. All the resources of strength and skill unavailing. The pass so narrow that a single man defending it can check the onset of 10,000. All means up. A fence in the hands of the enemy. All points of vantage already forfeited by ourselves. In this terrible plight, even though we had the most valiant soldiers and the keenest of weapons, how could they be employed with the slightest effect? Students of Greek history may be reminded of the awful toast of the Sicilian expedition and the agony of the Athenians and the niches and Demosthenes. 11. On dispersive ground, therefore, fight not. On facile ground, halt not. On contentious ground, attack not. But rather, let all your energies be bent on occupying the advantageous position first. So, Kung, Lai Chuan and others. However, suppose the meaning to be that the enemy has already forestalled us, so that it would be sheer madness to attack. In the sum, Suru Suru Hu, when the king of Wu inquires what should be done in this case, Sun Tzu replies, the rule with regard to contentious ground is that those in possession have the advantage over the other side. If a position of this kind is secured first by the enemy, beware of attacking him. Lure him away by pretending to flee. Show your banners and sound your drums. Make a dash for other places that he cannot afford to lose. Trail brushwood and raise a dust. Confound his ears and eyes. Attach a body of your best troops and place it secretly in ambuscade. Then your opponent will sally. Fourth to the rescue. 12. On open ground, do not try to block the enemy's way, because the attempt would be futile and would expose the blocking force itself to serious risks. There are two interpretations available here. I follow that of Chang Yu. The other is indicated in Tao Kung's brief note.
Okay, there is
Draw
a
close
bandit,
together.
015, 43 miles.
See that a portion of your own army is not cut off. On ground of intersecting highways, join hands with your allies.
Alright, I got dirt at 4 o'clock.
Perhaps form alliances with neighboring states. 13. On serious ground, gathering plunder. Beyond this, Li Xuan has the following delicious note. When an army penetrates far into the enemy's country, care must be taken not to alienate the people by unjust treatment. Follow the example of the Han Emperor Kaio Teo, whose march into China, a territory, was marked by no violation of women or looting of valuables. Nota bene, this was in 207 BC, and may well cause us to blush for the Christian armies that entered Peking in 1900 AD. Yet they thus won the hearts of all. In the present passage, then I think that the true reading must be not plunder, but do not plunder. Whereas I fear that in this instance, the worthy commentator's feelings outran his judgment. Too new, at least, has no such illusions. He says, when he camped on serious ground, there being no inducement as yet to advance further and no possibility of retreat, one ought to take measures for a protracted resistance by bringing in provisions from all sides and keep a close watch on the enemy. In difficult ground, keep steadily on the march. 4, in the words of VES2, do not encamp. 14, on Hind, in ground resort to stratagem. But Khan says, try the effect of some unusual artifice, and Tuyu amplifies this by saying, in such a position, some scheme must be devised, which will suit the circumstances, and if we can succeed in deluding the enemy, the peril may be escaped. This is exactly what happened on the famous occasion when Hannibal was hemmed in among the mountains on the road to Castellano, and to all appearances entrapped by the dictator families. The stratagem which Hannibal devised to baffle his foes was remarkably like that which Tien Tan had also employed with success exactly 62 years before. When night came on, bundles of twigs were fastened to the horns of some 2,000 oxen and set on fire, the terrified animals being then quickly driven along the mountainside towards the passes which were beset by the enemy. The strange spectacle of these rapidly moving lights so alarmed and discomfited the Romans that they withdrew from their position, and Hannibal's army passed safely through the defile. On desperate ground, fight. For, as Chi Lin remarks, if you fight with all your might, there is a chance of life, whereas death is certain if you cling to a corner. 15. Those who were called skillful leaders of old knew how to drive a wedge between the enemy's front and rear, or literally cause the front and rear to lose touch with each other, to prevent cooperation between his large and small divisions, to hinder the good troops from rescuing the bad, the officers from rallying their men. 16. When the enemy's men were scattered, they prevented them from concentrating. Even when their forces were united, they managed to keep them in disorder. 17. When it was to their advantage, they made a forward move. When otherwise, they stopped still. Sime Yao Chen connects this with the foregoing. Having succeeded in thus dislocating the enemy, they would push forward in order to secure any advantage to be gained. If there was no advantage to be gained, they would remain where they were. 18. If asked how to cope with a great host of the enemy in orderly array, and on the point of marching to the attack, I should say, begin by seizing something which your opponent holds dear. Then he will be immune to your will. The opinions differ as to what Sun Tzu had in mind. Cao Kun thinks it is some strategical advantage on which the enemy is dependent. Tu says, the three things which an enemy is anxious to do, and on the accomplishment of which his success depends, are 1. To capture our favorable positions, 2. To ravage our cultivated land, 3. To guard his own communications. Our object then must be to thwart his plans in these three directions, and thus render him helpless. Seth, I is 3. I is 3. By boldly seizing the initiative in this way, you at once throw the other side on the defensive. 19. Rapidity is the essence of war. According to Tu Lu, this is a summary of leading principles in warfare, and he adds, these are the profoundest truths of military science, and the chief business of the general. The following anecdotes told by Ho Shai shows the importance attached to speed by two of China's greatest generals. In 227 AD, Meng Ta, governor of Hesinei-Cheng under the Wei Emperor Wen Tai, was meditating defection to the House of Shu, and had entered into correspondence with Zhuge Liang, prime minister of that state. The Wei general Su Mao, I was then military governor of Wei, and getting wind of Meng Ta's treachery, he at once set off with an army to anticipate his revolt, having previously cajoled him by a specious message of friendly import. Soon Mao's officers came to him and said, if Meng Tai has leagued himself with Wu and Chu, the matter should be thoroughly investigated before we make a move.
You're gonna do funky shit?
Meng Tai is an unprincipled man, and we ought to go and punish him at once while he is still wavering before he is thrown off the mast. Then by a series of forced marches, he brought his army under the walls of Xinjiang within a space of 8 days. Now Meng Tai previously said in a letter to Zhuge Liang, 1 is 1,200 li from here. When the news of my revolt reaches Su, will at once inform his imperial master, but it will be a whole month before any steps can be taken, and by that time, my city will be well fortified. Besides, Su Mao Yi is sure not to come himself, and the generals that will be sent against us are not worth troubling about. The next letter, however, was filled with consternation. Though only 8 days have passed since I threw off my allegiance, an army is already at the city gates. What miraculous rapidity is this? A fortnight later is this. A fortnight later, see, Cheng had fallen and Mengta had lost his head. In 621 AD, Li Cheng was sent from Koai Chu in Essushuan II, Essushuan, to reduce the successful rebel Xiao Haxian, who had set up as emperor at the modern Qingqiu Fu in Hubei. It was autumn, on the Yangtze being then in flood. Xiao Haxian never dreamt that his adversary would venture to come down through the gorges, and consequently made no preparations. But Li Cheng embarked his army without loss of time, and was just about to start when the other generals implored him to postpone his departure until the river was in a less dangerous state for navigation. Li Cheng replied, "To the soldier, overwhelming speed is of paramount importance, and he must never miss opportunities. Now is the time to strike, before Xiao Haxian even knows that we have got an army together. If we seize the present moment when the river is in flood, we shall appear before his capital with startling suddenness, like the thunder which is heard before you have time to stop your ears against it." CVIS.
Note 11 o'clock.
Note, this is the great principle in war. Even if he gets to know of our approach, he will have to levy his soldiers in such a hurry that they will not be fit to oppose us. Thus, the full fruits of victory will be ours. All came about as he predicted, and Xiao Haxian was obliged to surrender, nobly stipulating that his people should be spared and he alone suffer the penalty of death. Take advantage of the enemy's unreadiness, make your way by unexpected routes, and attack unguarded spots.
We've got a friendly crew ship. Raw.
The following are the principles to be
38 miles,
observed by
Angel
an
10.
invading force.
Wilco.
The further you penetrate into a country, the greater will be the solidarity of
Are
your
we looking
troops,
diggity?
and thus the defenders will not prevail against you. 21. Make forays in fertile country in order to supply your army with food. Chaff, Supra, S13. Li Aishuan does not venture on a note here. 22. Carefully study the well-being of your men. For well-being, Wang Hesai means pet them, humour them, give them plenty of food and drink, and look after them generally. And do not overtax them. Concentrate your energy and hoard your strength. Trollsham recalls the line of action
I got dirt
adopted
at
in
10 o'clock.
224 BC by the famous General Wang Qian, whose military genius largely contributed
I
to
got
the
some dirt
success
on the
of the
nose.
first emperor. He had invaded the Chu state, where a universal levy was made to oppose him. But being doubtful of the temper
Oh,
of
I'm
his
showing
troops,
nails
he
on
declined
the
all invitations to fight and remained strictly on the defensive. In vain did the 8 Chu general try to force a battle. Day after day, Wang Qian kept inside his walls and would not come out, but devoted his whole time and energy to winning the affection and confidence of his men. He took care that they should be well fed, sharing his own meals with them, provided facilities for bathing, and employed every method of judicious indulgence to roll them into a loyal and homogeneous body. After some time had elapsed, he told off certain persons to find out how the men were amusing themselves. The answer was that they were contending with one another in putting the weight and long jumping. When Wang Chen heard that they were engaged in these athletic pursuits, he knew that their spirits had been strung up to the required pitch, and that they were now ready for fighting. By this time, the 8 Chu army, after repeating their challenge again and again, had marched away eastwards in disgust. The Chime general immediately broke up his camp and followed them, and in the battle that ensued, they were routed with great slaughter. Shortly afterwards, the whole of Zhou was conquered by Qin, and the king Fuwei fled into captivity. Keep your army continually on the move, and in order that the enemy will never know exactly where you are. It is struck me, however, that the true you might be link your army together and devise unfathomable plans. 23. Throw your soldiers into positions whence there is no escape, and they will prefer death to flight. If they will face death, there is nothing they may not achieve. Chang Yu quotes his favorite Wei Liao Tzu, age 3. If one man were to
There is
run
a
amok
friendly
with a sword in the
F-18, 12
marketplace,
o'clock.
Oh,
and
fuck.
everybody else tried to get
12
out of his
o'clock.
way,
Hot.
I should
Break
not
left.
allow that this
Missile,
man
12
alone
o'clock.
had courage,
Hot. Break
and that all
left.
the rest
There's
were
a
contemptible
bandit, 12
cowards.
o'clock.
The
2
truth
miles.
is that a desperado and a man who sets some value on his life do not on even terms. Officers and men alike will prove their utmost strength.
Oh shit.
He says, if they are in an awkward
Blacking
place,
out here.
they will surely exist to get out of it. 24. Soldiers, when in desperate straits, lose the sense of fear. If there is no place of refuge, they will stand firm. If they are in the heart of a hostile country, they will show a stubborn front. If there is no help for it, they will fight hard. 25. Thus, without waiting to be marshaled, the soldiers will be constantly on the field. Without waiting to be asked, they will literally, without asking, will get. Without
Sam
restrictions,
got
they will
me.
be faithful. Without giving orders, they can be
Oh yeah,
trusted.
flow low.
26. Prohibit the taking of oaths, and do
Oh my
away
God.
with superstitious doubts. Then, until death itself comes, no calamity need be feared. The superstitious, bound into saucy doubts and fears, degenerate into cowards and die many times before their deaths. To rule, quotes Huang Shai, spells and incantations should be strictly forbidden, and no officer allowed to inquire by divination into the fortunes of an army, for fear the soldiers' minds should be seriously perturbed. The meaning is, he continues, that if all doubts and scruples are discarded, your men will never falter in their resolution until they die. 27. If our soldiers are not overburdened with money, it is not because they have a distaste for riches. If their lives are not unduly long, it is not because they are disinclined to longevity. Zhang Yu has the best note
We're
on
not
this
the mirages
passage.
with
Wealth
Sam.
and long life are things for which all men have a natural inclination. Hence, if they burn or fling away valuables and sacrifice their own lives, it is not that they dislike them, but simply
We're
that
gonna
they
eat
have
some
no
dinner.
choice.
Bye, Jackson.
Some suits
See you next
slyly
time.
insinuating that, as soldiers are but human, it is for the general to see that temptations to shirk fighting and grow rich are not thrown in their way. 28. On the day they are ordered out to battle, your soldiers may weep. The word in the Chinese is snivel. This is taken to indicate more genuine